women as well got the idea that, wait a minute, I want to stay home and bake cookies, and you're telling me I'm inadequate. And it seems that the tune of feminism, again, has changed since then.
Well, there's been many, it's feminisms. It really is. We're talking about many different schools. But here's what the libertarian aspect comes in. I have no business telling you whether or not you should stay home and bake cookies. Or at least I certainly have no business having the government come in and creating legislation that makes that decision for you. And everything you mentioned about the family unit has implications for the state. I mean, the whole notion of marriage, the state marriage. For example, people still, and this is very interesting in a society where people are very comfortable with premarital sex, is where they will go to the courthouse, no matter what kind of religious ceremony or what kind of other things that come along with it, they have to have that license. They must have that mark of the state where they come in there. Okay, now what does that do? Well, it allows the state to come into your bedroom and enforce a contract. But better yet, as a great man Michael Badnarik would say, what does that license give you that you, what right does it give you that you didn't have the right the night before? So everything, you know, our tax code, of course, is based on families. I mean, after all, it privileges certain groups and not others. Everything has implications for the state. And where libertarians come in is that we're trying to remove the state from those roles. If tomorrow,
at least from our lives.
Yes.
If other people would like more guidance in their lives, there are certainly institutions that they can find it. If they want to believe that marriage, that a person should be married before they engage in any kind of sexual behavior with someone, that's fine. You should be able to believe that, and you should be able to go to your church and get whatever kind of blessings that you would like from whatever religious institution that you feel part of. But libertarians would like to be able to opt out of that system, or make it possible to, if you would like to.
There's nothing stopping you from going to any religious group and having that leader, you know, perform a ceremony. And there's nothing from stopping that from making that binding, because in fact, I mean, you are making a vow in front of your God and all your relatives. So it's not as if anything changes socially. You're still getting the anthropological benefits of having a public union.
So this kind of these kind of ideas going out into our culture seems to have led us to the debate over gay marriage as well, I think, at this point, because again, we're going back to the church, and there are churches that perform the same kind of purpose in a gay neighborhood that a church would in a straight neighborhood, and they perform marriages. But the government will recognize only the marriages performed by one church and not another. And that is, of course, a violation of the Constitution, in that they're recognizing an institution of religion, and they're not recognizing the other interpretation of Christianity that would allow for a same-sex marriage. So it seems like what you're talking about has then being digested by our culture has somehow led us to where we are now in the current debate we have over gay marriage. That's interesting. I never actually thought of it that way before. So how does libertarian feminism, how does that differ from regular feminism, or these other kinds of feminism that you're talking about?
Well, I mean, one would be whether or not, well, first of all, it's the collectivist versus the individual. I mean, for Catherine McKinnon, the whole sense of private space and the individual is almost abhorrent to her. I mean, she believes privacy, for example, is basically an excuse for the patriarchy to beat, rape, and, you know, destroy children. So she believes, and also too, the view of women and gender feminism is collectivist.
So she was
women as a class.
She was very radical in a lot of ways, and very much the opposite of a libertarian in a lot of ways.
Well, I don't know if radicals. She is totalitarian. You cannot listen to this woman and not think of fascism. I don't. But I mean, also too, she completely demeans the utter notion of the individual. When you talk about women collectively and those kind of generalities, when men make women, I mean, I guess the one thing that I do always find, it's obnoxious in comedy, it's obnoxious in literature, it's obnoxious in everything, are these generalities about women. Because in gender feminism, it's assumed that all women are the same, and we are not, and that we don't. Basically, it denies women autonomy. So yes, it's not just the role of between women, you know, women as human beings and women the role of state, but whether or not we even have the right to make very, very basic choices. And feminists are always great about talking about choices when it comes to abortion.
Right.
But when it comes to almost anything else, suddenly now they've backed off from that very, very simple notion, natural right notion of the individual.
Are
Backed away from
there
it.
any feminists that were prominent in the 70s or 80s that were libertarian-esque or libertarian-leaning besides Paglia?
Well, she didn't come until the 90s. I mean, she'd been around for a long time, but she didn't finally reach full recognition
Right.
until 91. Actually, I go back, and some of my favorite feminists are very, very peculiar people that I used to read when I was a child. I was a little girl reading people like Una Stannard and her tome Mrs. Mann. It was all about, and it sounds very, very silly now, but all about the right. It was an entire book about the right for a woman to keep her last name, which now, of course, most women.
Now that's accepted.
Yeah, it's totally acceptable.
But we have hyphenated
Yes.
names.
But in the 70s, it was like separate banking accounts. It was very controversial, women having their own checking accounts.
Right.
And just in the lifetime, in the 35 years, let's say, of the Libertarian Party, our entire relationship, women's entire relationship with the state has changed.
Right.
We have a great deal more freedom, and certainly, and in the past, even in this country, if we could look at the whole time from the beginning of the United States, we buy and sell property. There's very few jobs women are not allowed to work in. I mean, women are practically in combat roles overseas. Not that I necessarily think that's a great victory
Right.
for women, but it's.
Right.
But,
That's a disturbing
it's-
that's a disturbing element of feminism, and that's actually very interesting. I mean, it seems like okay, now women are going and doing their fair share of the bloodletting in our foreign wars, whether you're for or against the wars, or no matter what your opinion on, that doesn't seem like something that was planned out from the beginning. It doesn't seem that's the pinnacle of feminism, but still.
No, but so be it. I mean, if you're that big a believer in Big Mama the state, by all means, steal my money and go kill an Iraqi.
Right.
Which is what you're doing. I mean, it's something. You have the right to do that. It's fine. And I'm glad that women are taking on that responsibility. However, I don't think
You don't
there's
particularly
anything
approve
righteous.
of that particular responsibility.
I don't approve of anyone taking my money to do that. If you feel strongly enough about doing whatever in a third world country, then please take your money,
Get
take
on
your
a plane
weapons,
and
and
go
do
there
it.
yourself.
Don't do it on my behalf, though.
And another thing, which leads me to another thought that I've always had. Women, there are less women in jail for murder. Now, do you think if women become entirely equal with men, that we'll have as many women in jail for murder as men?
I don't have a great answer to that, but I'll say this, is that are there some general differences in behavior between women and men? Yes, of course. You don't have as many autistic women, you don't have as many women geniuses either, okay? It's a narrower bell curve. And there aren't quite as many women murderers, though women are certainly violent. In fact, a friend of mine observed in social behavior that it does tend to be women who egg men on to violence.
So now,
You let that one go, didn't you? That's
well,
a whole other show, I think, isn't it?
that's a whole other show.
Yeah.
But I'd have to have that research
Okay.
and look at it and have it on the show. But that's very interesting. But the attitudes, in the Libertarian Party and in the Libertarian movement, which is certainly outside the Libertarian Party, has vastly changed. Is there, as going back to another question, besides Paglia, anyone else that would be a little more on the libertarian side that's a known
Wendy
feminist?
McAvoy, is a great Canadian anarchist, or maybe I shouldn't say she's Canadian, but a great anarchist. There are lots of women. There's different women who've been thought to be libertarian leaning only because they've wanted less role for the state. Christina Hoff Sommers, who's basically a conservative, has been thought to be. Generally speaking, though, the great women in the libertarian movement haven't been thought to be feminists. If you go back to the beginning with Ayn Rand or Isabel Patterson or Rose Wilder Lane.
Now, what did the feminists, Ayn Rand is kind of the philosophical grandmother of libertarianism.
You better believe it.
So what was the reaction to the feminists and some of the ones you were describing? Did they have any reaction or comment to Ayn Rand's philosophy?
I think her reaction might have been more interesting because I do believe, and this is going back to my childhood knowledge of this, I think she did find feminism, the way it at least existed in her time, as being abhorrent because, of course, all these great notions of hero worship. However, it's